It's time to start the CareCast, brought to you by the Knowledge and Evaluation Research Unit at Mayo Clinic. I am Victor Montori, and I'm hosting today's CareCast. And today we are in for a treat. Um, with us, Professor Russell Glasgow. Um, Professor Glasgow at University of Colorado is one of the leading authorities in dissemination and implementation science. He has been a leader in developing an understanding of the context in which interventions are implemented and what makes them work in the real world and for the people that they're intended to be used. This initially not a very noteworthy enterprise has become really important as people have recognized the extent to which the advances of science fail to reach the people they're intended to. And we spend more and more resources in developing new interventions without ensuring that the ones that we already have actually manifest their real value. I'm sure we're going to continue to discuss this during the next hour. Russell, thank you very much for joining the CareCast.
Well, thanks so much. It's great to be with you. And I might just comment, I appreciated your observation there about the field of implementation science, just kind of finally coming into its own, if you will, towards the end of my career. I've felt for many years like, beating my head against a cement wall or something, but it is kind of reinforcing to see it get a little more attention now.
Well, just like the proverbial water on the rock hitting your head against the wall, finally has break the wall.
Right.
And you're looking good after the effort, so this is good. One of the things that we do here is we try to go through a few questions, but the first one that we normally get into is this idea of one's career as a journey, and the question I'm intrigued about in relation to that, particularly towards the folks who are joining us who are starting their careers, is how does one get to be Russell Glasgow? What is that process? Is that a determination from day one? Is it chance? Is it a combo? How do you see that now?
Good question. Certainly, I'd say circuitous. At a few points, I think I would say planful or purposeful, and also at a number, probably a result of chance or kind of serendipitous events. I grew up in a small town in Iowa, about 10,000 residents. Went to a pretty small high school there. I'm the first one, my family, to go to college. And I started out, I followed one of what I understood of be the only two paths, according to my high school advisor that worked with people thinking about college, is that I could either be a teacher or an engineer. And so I started down the track of being an aerospace engineer. And then several things happened at that took me different directions.
What year are we talking about?
Let's see. I graduated from high school in 1968.
So that would be Vietnam War, Martin Luther King assassination, that era.
Yes, yeah. In particular, like my early college years were kind of the Vietnam War era, was things were coming to a head then. So
and how did that affect teacher versus engineer path?
Well, fairly markedly, actually. I was at a state essentially agriculture and engineering school. And I was enjoying the physics and the chemistry and the initial engineering courses, but it just felt less and less relevant to me. There's so much going on out there in the world and things, and it seemed like such a at times irrelevant bubble. And at least partially as a result of that, I switched to the more liberal arts, more quote unquote progressive university at the University of Iowa.
Well,
Then and
hold on for a second. So nothing wrong with that shift, but I want to understand one thing. This is also the moonshot era. The actual the literal moonshot, right? I mean, we're
yes,
getting ready to go to the moon. So for an engineer candidate, that would have been like, really really fascinating. I mean, aerospace
well,
engineering, right? I mean, that's what you
yeah,
were
you're
thinking.
right. I'd have to go back, Victor. I don't know the exact sequence of years there, but certainly building up to that was, I think maybe it just seems so distant, from a first year student or whatever to
I mean,
making an
the moon
impact.
seemed far away.
Yeah, one of my or lesser qualities is I'm not a real patient person, so maybe that had something to do with it. Oh,
So you were saying that in doing this, the Vietnam War and the challenges of what was going on around you made it seem less interesting, less relevant. So you changed directions.
I did, right. Changed directions, institutions, and my major to psychology.
Huh. And why psychology?
Um, Good question. I think I wanted to do something that had a little more direct interaction with people. I wanted something that still had science. I always loved the STEM curriculum and things, but that dealt a little bit more, I think, with people more directly too.
Little warmer. It's interesting that I'm reflecting here as you tell this. My path to medicine. I wanted to be an electrical engineer,
Ah,
and I was interested in circuits and things, and then realized that this whole thing was so cold, and so I started asking, what's the warmer version of this? And I went to thinking of neuroscience, right? The neural
yeah, right.
circuits in one's head. And then I realized, much to my chagrin, that in order to get into neuroscience and the abnormalities of those circuits, one has to become a physician. So I went into medical school in Peru, you go right out of high school
Uh,
in pursuit of that warmer version of of electrical engineering.
yeah.
So yeah, so the psychology of the individual was interesting to you.
It was, and I have to say that's maybe one of the more fortuitous things that happened more by chance. In order to put myself through school, I had work study aid and grant, and I was fortunate enough to have my work study be with a really great professor, one of the leading people, young investigators coming out in the field of behavior therapy, Tom Borkovic. And so, that was just wonderful for me because I could, support myself, but then learn all these exciting things too. And then as a result of working with him for a couple years, I think that put me in good position to get into graduate school, which I did in clinical psychology out at the University of Oregon.
And is this the heyday of social psychology as well, where all these
Um,
experiments with like the prison experiment in Stanford and all that stuff?
It's, yeah, related to that. What was more of an influence where I was in particular, we had some of that Stanford influence and collaboration, but more probably to some of the leading people there that more directly impacted us were Walter Mischel with a lot of the child and adolescent work, delay of gratification, and then especially Albert Bandura on his social learning theory. That was kind of the dominant influence, I think, in my program there. And then another one that some of the listeners might be familiar with is Peter Lewinson. Done an awful lot of work in depression, as well as neuropsychology, by the way, mentioned it before. And then my primary mentor, Ed Lichtenstein, who's one of the preeminent smoking cessation researchers in the world.
So a lot of individual behavioral modification, experimentation type of thing.
Yes, exactly.
So how does one go from aerospace engineering, individual clinical psychology, behavioral modification to implementation science?
Mm-hmm. Well, a few different twists and turns before we get there. The initial one, and maybe one that was purposeful at this stage in my career, is I was enjoying the individual work, and I focused primarily on health behavior change. Did a little work on anxiety and depression, particularly phobia was big in terms of a research paradigm then. But in terms of the health behavior change work, and again, I did my dissertation with Ed Lichtenstein on smoking cessation, is I just rapidly became aware of the limits of working one-on-one with people and just realized, how powerful the social forces, the, if you will, the social ecologic model and the different things all the way from policy to family to community things like Clean Indoor Air Acts or the absence of such and things. And I just became really drawn to more community influence in these broader contextual issues.
So it seems like it's been content and context, and with context, context has been driving your career choices, but then also driving your gaze, your attention, from what is happening to in what context it's happening. Am I getting that right?
You are, absolutely. I'd say that would probably be one of the themes, and I'm still trying to work on today. I say one other aspect of what I try to work on is being pragmatic and trying to not oversimplify things, but to have a relatively straightforward and efficient approach to some really complex issues there. And I guess that's the other thing, trying to make sense out of systems and complexity issues, and to realize the contextual factors, but to try and figure out where we can about what things in the context can we change.
So let me take you in a slightly different direction here, just because I'm excited about the apparent contradiction. You just described a number of things that people are usually trained to simplify. In fact, what you mentioned, complexity, interactions, and other things. That's the kind of stuff you control for in doing your very clean experiment. You try to keep all of those things the same, and in that way background them from your attention so you can focus on the things you're experimenting with. And I would think that in a lot of the psychological experiments, in fact, that's the thing, is you control for all of those things, and you put people in controlled environments. I'm just thinking, since you mentioned impulse control, I'm just thinking of the little 3-year-old with a little marshmallow in the chamber with nothing else happening around, right? And you're interested in that nothing else happenings around, in fact, realizing that real life doesn't happen. So how do you handle that, that apparent tension or that real tension, really?
Yeah. It was a real tension. And interesting, a brief aside, I kind of had a flashback when you mentioned that control, as one of the things early in my career we did was the old Skinnerian rat experiments and things. So I did do some of that. Funny, but to more directly
I,
address
I
your
just want to point out that flashbacks is a symptom of PTSD. So I don't know if that.
well, I have some of that. I'm not sure. Actually, I like my rat and I got on quite well. So I don't think that was necessarily bad for either of us. But yes, good point taken, though. Let's see. I was going to say this issue, of oversimplifying and trying to control everything is actually one of the things that I think throughout my career that I rebelled against. I think, and I would say that's something, and I'd say partially as a result of my training and where I saw the limits there and what was more or less reified, and I would say still today in a number of circles, the classic highly controlled efficacy, sometimes I like to say triple blind, efficacy study that purposely controls and minimizes contextual factors. That's been one of the things that I guess I've rebelled against. And I like to say sometimes that what we unlearn, is as important as what we learned.
Mm. So you use the expression triple blind. Is that related to something in particular?
I just made that up.
Oh,
Usually the double blind study, is the ultimate or whatever. So,
yeah. We wrote a paper with colleagues in Canada about the use of the term double blind, in that it actually hides who in fact was blind. But it sounds like in your hands, that blinding is not just to the whether you got the intervention or the control, but also you're blind to the investigator is blind to the context in which the whole thing is happening, and the effect of that context on an interaction with the intervention. Um, just a little aside, in relation to, I'm curious about your opinion about this. So I'm a diabetes doctor, right? And some people consider that some of our activity has to focus on turning people who have developed, for instance, type 2 diabetes, turning people away from the habits that may have contributed to the development of that and other chronic condition. Smoking, reduced physical activity, increased consumption of carbohydrates and other things. And so behavior modification becomes a part of the activities that we do, along with self-management education to help people get further. And there's a whole lot of work right now to try to use technology to provide surveillance of people's behaviors, and potentially even enact some of that behavior modification through technology, the same way in which our phones and our interactions online are constantly under surveillance by tech giants, who then sell the prediction of our behaviors and behavior modification to those who are interested in that, mostly marketing firms, advertising firms. How do you see that evolution from the clinical psychology days, the Bandura days, the experiments of behavior change, with the extent to which that has moved on to now have corporations really making a business case that they can modify our behaviors in directions of those who pay? For instance, in the case of Medicare, it will be in the direction of healthy behaviors.
right. Um, Challenging and really a complex question, I think. As I try to reflect back on myself and the work that I've done in self-management, and particularly diabetes, I believe that's where maybe you and I first came into contact with each other,
I
was
believe
some of
so.
our diabetes work. Um, again, another area in which I was really fortunate to work with one of the real giants, I think, the field was Ed Wagner and his chronic care model. And I was there at a time that I was able to really help Ed and colleagues flush out and try to operationalize the self-management, support component of that. And that was kind of another switch for both me and I think the field in terms of doing that in two ways from, if you will, the traditional, maybe simplistic initial behavior modification to engage much more, the patient and the cognitive factors, to switch to cognitive behavior therapy there. And then again, the context factor. I think working a lot with patients and their families. First of all, I tend like a lot. I didn't do work with type 1, so it was generally older adults with type 2. And there, the family was so central, and that was kind of where I started out, focusing on some of these broader factors of social support, and often like well-meaning support that didn't end up being so supportive after all. And then this is kind of a jump shift, but to come back to your technology
Yeah.
issue there, we were one of the early adopters, I think, of technology. These were, now really, really rudimentary and crude web-based programs and things. We didn't have the biosensors and markers and that sort of thing, but we did work with people, to create individualized behavior plans online that did take into account context, and we felt did a reasonable job anyway of our buzzword then was collaborative goal setting. And to try and do that, in a way that truly was collaborative, not just giving lip service to it, which I think is a challenge. Admittedly, that was pretty challenging, through the web-based technology. But I'm still a believer, though I'm very concerned about some of the things that happened that you've mentioned about, selling of all of our information, as well as our genome and things. But I do think that there is a way that technology can really help kind of all sides, both patients and families, but also the healthcare provider system, who has, zero time and sometimes very little training in dealing like behavior change issues. Again, I don't see them, as opposites or either or trying to replace, patient-centered care, but as a way to help inform, and make it more efficient. And I think that's been a theme both in diabetes and then some more recent work we've been doing with kind of technology mediated behavior changes to try and inform both sides, the patient and providers, and in fact, to use the technology to kind of help prepare both of those, for productive discussions and things.
Yeah, no, I think that's really fascinating. I'm given that you're an expert in context, I think the evolution of big tech and the intrusion of big tech in behavioral modification, I think, is something that is quite a concern. One of the things that we explore here is this issue of what are the values that move people forward in their research, right, in their career. What would you say is the primary value that has moved your career forward?
Can I cheat and have two?
Yes, you
Uh,
can.
I would say, and at least the first one may need a little explanation, but I would say transparency would be number one. And also transparency in the service of the second value, and that's essentially public health impact or public health good.
Mhm.
And try and flesh that out a little bit. What I mean by that is, I guess I see myself primarily as a methodologist. I no longer do clinical work myself, but I think that a lot of our methods, some of this goes back to the earlier discussion that we had about, control experiments and things like that, is often that we unintentionally essentially hide things, and we hide the context under which we get results. So for example, our interventions are done, at the world's best tertiary academic medical centers They're done by the world's experts, in the intervention. They're done with highly selected patients, often that have no comorbidities. One of the issues near and dear to your heart, I know, that you've led us on. And they're done with incredibly expensive interventions that very few places would be able to do or to carry out. And also, let me state that there's nothing per se the matter with that. And some people feel that's a necessary stage. My problem with it all along has been people jump from there to find something that's efficacious under that very limited, highly controlled context to then expect that that's going to work in the real world, low resource settings with complex patients with all sorts of other issues going on, and staff that has no time, and settings that have no resources, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I mean about the transparency. And then in both designing and then reporting in particular, our science. I feel it's more important to do that and to focus on just exactly what was the context. And by doing that, I hope, I can't prove this yet, but we're focusing more, that this can at least be one way to help address our replication crisis, that we have at all levels of science, but I think maybe particularly more as we get to, less laboratory type settings.
Mm-hmm. So, and then you said transparency and public health good.
Yes.
And the public health good is connected to the transparency in that it cannot be realized until we confront the challenges, the barriers and facilitators, so to speak, of translating those efficacious interventions into the real conditions on the ground.
Absolutely. And then focusing on our, for the last 20 years, I've been with colleagues working on our re-aim model,
Yes.
that really focuses on the factors, or sometimes the steps, if you will, that result in public health impact. In addition to the initial efficacy or effectiveness, what are these other factors? And most of those are contextual, and they have to do not only with like the percentage of the population that can be reached or impacted, but also really importantly, the representativeness. And certainly today, I mean, the equity implications of everything hit us. Like COVID, of course, is the predominant example that we all think about, 24 hours a day. But, nowhere, I mean, that has just pulled out, all the equity issues just hit you, right between the way. Over the years, we've been focusing through this representative dimension about all the various ways and things that inequities can arise. And I should say, I think usually unintentionally, including some of the technology things. I mean, I don't think people set out to develop technology or web-based programs to say, hey, we're going to rip people off here and we don't care about people, and that sort of thing. But I think it often happens unintentionally, particularly if you don't pay attention, you aren't aware of some of these unintended consequences.
Yeah. So if you've been if you don't have the skills or the knowledge or the attitude to use that sort of phrase to understand the value of context, then you will be blind to it and you will miss it, right? And so that's where the unintended consequences may come in. I would like to come back later to this issue of equity and how you see that playing out. But re-aim has been a major contribution, Russ. I mean, you've made several contributions, but sometimes people are known for the one that has gotten probably most impact. And I would put forward that re-aim has gotten tremendous impact. Tell us about it, about your, I'm asking you about, how proud are you of the little kid, sort of things. So, tell us a little bit more about re-aim, how that came to be, and I think, and what satisfactions is given you.
Yeah. Good question. We have another 3 hours, right?
Yeah, you and I do. Most other people listening don't, but you and I might have. Yes, go ahead.
Well, again, to go back to this story about seeing the limits of the individual level, that really was how it originated. looking at all these other factors is I started doing more work that was beyond the one-to-one individual, where we started working in work sites and then in whole communities and things like that. So I realized some of these other factors. And so all along, REAIM was intended to look at the various factors that were important for producing public health or population impact. Um, and we started out using these for behavior change things, as I mentioned, health behavior change. But then it has been rewarding, honestly, to see how it's kind of taken hold more broadly and in different fields and things. REAIM is, well, this year, I guess it's going on 21 years
I
old.
can start drinking.
There you go. Good one. I'll use that next time. But like with any framework, I think it runs the danger of potentially being ossified or stuck where it began. And that's something that I've worked pretty hard on. And there's a number of ways that we don't have time to talk about here, but how REAIM has evolved over the time. I think in general to take account some of these more contextual factors, but still one thing that's hard for me today is that often when you look at how it's characterized or how grant proposals are reviewed, for example, or publication, they're still using the 1999 version of REAIM. And in fact, sometimes I feel really bad for young aspiring scientists who use the correct, more up-to-date, more contextual, fuller, I think more sophisticated approach to REAIM, and then they literally get beat up in study sections. They say, no, you can't use REAIM this way, despite a lot of evidence that in fact you can.
Yeah, so it's people get anchored on the first thing they learned, and they haven't kept up with the
Yeah.
development. What's everything that gets used a lot because it's very helpful
Right.
also gets misused. Have you seen any misuses of REAIM?
Yes, yeah, I think we have. Um, the most frequent is actually not serious, I don't think, but the most frequent one is some, as you well know, but for some of the listeners, REAIM has elements both at the individual level, the reach and effectiveness, and then at the more setting or broader contextual level, the adoption, implementation, and maintenance. Frequently, people will confuse the two, particularly the reach and the adoption at that level. So that's a common issue. The other way is that a number of people feel that REAIM can only be used after the fact for post hoc evaluation. And I feel that's one of the really missed opportunities, or the area that's quite frustrating, because that's not at all our intent. In fact, I mean, why would you want to wait till the action's all over then to find out that in fact you have an intervention that has low reach, low effectiveness, there's certainly no maintenance and that sort of thing. So we feel it's really important to use REAIM both for planning, and more recently our work has focused on what we're calling iterative use of REAIM to make mid-course adjustments as your program is going along and being implemented.
So almost like the adaptive clinical trial, but in this case, what is being adapted is adapted for implementation optimization.
Precisely, and as usual, better said than I did. I'm going to be taking some notes here or listening to how I can craft this in my future talks.
You're being generous, which reminds me that another thing that we like to ask our guests is, our research unit has 3 values, right? Patient-centeredness, integrity, and generosity. Any of these resonate more with you?
Well, they all resonate. This was one of the things your listeners may know that you did kind of prep me for, so I had a chance to think a bit. I don't know that I still have a great answer, but I'm going to hedge a bit and say they're all relevant, but I think I think the integrity is the one that resonates the most. If I can just say a word about the generosity, I think for me has to do with contributing, supporting others, particularly younger investigators. And maybe that's closer to generativity. But at this stage of my career, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that, and hopefully, have helped some other people. I've always enjoyed like consulting. The patient-centeredness, I think, comes for me from back to my training, where I switched away from the more narrower kind of non-cognitive behavior modification to kind of social cognitive and learning theory and things, and then particular through my work with diabetes and other chronic illnesses on self-management support. But if I have to restrict to one answer, I would say integrity. And that again kind of cycles back to this other notion. When you asked me, I said my own word was transparency, and both thinking about what we're doing in both our science and clinical community work, but also how we report on it. And again, I think it's just this notion that we often tend, and again, I don't mean to be pejorative, I often come off as, really being seen as overly negative. I don't think this is intentional, but I think often we will cherry pick the very best settings, the least complex, most motivated patients, to do our work in there. And I almost feel strongly enough that this is a quasi-ethical issue. In again, not that we do that I accept that we need all types of science, but then that we don't, in terms of interpreting our results or what we recommended, how it's being used, we don't have the humility to realize that those results were found under that set of conditions. And it's an open question, empirical question, how well that's going to work into other much more challenging situations.
Yeah, some people worry that a interpretation of, in that continuum of efficacy to effectiveness, of attention to the effect of the intervention in the highly controlled circumstances versus the real world effect, so to speak. Some people say that if you were to dismiss, which is not what you're suggesting, but at the extreme is to say, oh, okay, we have preliminary evidence. So evidence of efficacy is preliminary evidence of effectiveness, so to speak. Yeah. And if that is the case, very few things that we know work under controlled conditions will find their way into practice. In fact, one would say that in their way of getting into practice, they will have to jump through additional effectiveness study hoops before we can confidently implement them. And so that would extend the lag between the discovery to benefit in public health. What's your objection to that line of thinking?
Well, one, I think if you follow that step-by-step model, it would take forever. And I think that's part of our problem. It's not only the 17-year translation lag, but I think if you follow that through for doing basic research, then only then moving, maybe to human studies and then to tightly controlled efficacy studies, because usually, at least in my experience, and most everybody I know, it doesn't move because you don't have 100% success with the first step. So then you cycle back at the first step, go to the next little step, then you have to cycle back. And so, it literally never gets done when you get out there. So that's one thing that bothers me about that argument a bit. And then secondly, to some extent, not always and not perfectly, but I do think you can do some of those things simultaneously. And again, one of the design frameworks that's becoming popular in implementation science is called the hybrid effectiveness implementation trial, where you kind of study both of these, but you kind of vary over time how much emphasis there is on the effectiveness versus the implementation. I think strategies like that can move us along, a lot more quickly. The other one that is now that I and others are promoting and trying to do work in here now that's still a little more controversial is the notion of adaptations. And you mentioned adaptive designs before, but like during the course of a program, realizing when things aren't working and making some, again, I would say transparent and documenting what the adaptations are. But it doesn't make sense to me to spend several $1,000,000 doing something that you know early on isn't going to work. There are issues here, again, technical and complicated issues. But I argue that if you do this thoughtfully and that you focus on what are the key, some people say the core components or the principles or theory, I like to say more the functions that are done, that you often do need to make adaptations. And then in fact, in the real world, adaptations always happen. It's impossible to do that without, and even in many of our quote pristine like clinical trials and things like that, adaptations get made, but again, often not reported.
Yeah, our group works with designers, and designers have brought to our work this notion that as we develop interventions, which are inherently non-pharmacological complex interventions that we tend to use in practice, that we will develop those interventions in the same context with the same people,
Yeah,
and the same pressures and challenges in which they're going to eventually be used if they are found to be effective. So we're dealing with those adaptations even before we are testing for efficacy or effectiveness, but rather in the development process. In fact, our trigger to launch the trial is when we see the complex intervention work as intended in the context in which it's supposed to eventually work. You've been paying attention to the introduction of design in all this.
yeah.
What are your thoughts about it?
I've been paying attention and learning. I'm on a learning curve, but I strongly like support what you're doing. We're trying to use some of those strategies ourselves, but I think it's critical from implementation science perspective. You know, we say it's never too early to start planning for implementation or dissemination and sustainability or sustainment, which is another new area that I think is in some ways the last frontier. You know, now we are finally starting to get a few things implemented in the real world. They tend to have at least some level of effectiveness. Okay. They have some level of generalization, but then getting something that can be sustained, particularly when the level of attention and support and resources and things like that go away, is just, you know, really challenging.
Yeah, the maintenance aspect of it over time, and or the normalization, like our colleague
Yeah,
Carl May likes to talk about as well.
yeah,
Um, this series is about care that fits, and so we're interested in how care fits in the lives of patients and what is the process of fitting that occurs both in the clinic with the implementation of new interventions or the adaptation of existing programs of care, and also fitting at home, which connects back to the self-management support of the time where we connected the first time, which, by the way, it was the first time I remember of my mentor saying, just contact the guy. And the guy answered the contact with offerings of help, right? And to me, it opened a whole, I mean, I thought some of these famous people that you see in papers are, you know, are heavily protected people who you can't access, you know, unless you know the secret handshake and the password. But you demonstrated to me a level of generosity that was very enlightening. But this process of fitting is I think, we're knowing, since they happen in the real world, that whatever interventions we develop have to be designed from scratch to be effective and to reach older people that need to be reached, to be implemented with some degree of fidelity that makes them effective enough, and to be maintained and sustained over time. And this is where I think REAIM connects with this series in terms of care that fits, is in the fitting interventions, both at the level of the clinic and at the level of the individual. So there's a very nice, there's no connection. Russell, we have some questions from our audience, and one of them is, I'm hearing your answers about this topic of implementation and testing, something about the usefulness of merging quantitative and qualitative research to lead to development of the best evidence. Can you expand a bit on how you think we need to leverage mixed methods to best support this kind of work?
Yes. First of all, I couldn't agree more on the importance of it. Secondly, I am learning myself more and more about qualitative research. I was a bit latecomer to the game, again, because of this earlier kind of what was then viewed as science perspective, the quantitative one. But I just appreciate it more and more. And I've been fortunate to work with some really great qualitative and mixed methods researchers. So most directly, I think in REAIM, we now really call for and recommend mixed methods approaches in all REAIM studies and at all of the REAIM, the 5 REAIM dimensions. And the way in which I think that's so important is that we can do, the world's best job of documenting, like knowing the exact numerator and denominator or who participated in things, but without knowing why they participated and why they didn't, without knowing the how. And in general, at least in the areas I work into, the quantitative things just aren't at that level, and I'm not sure that they ever will be or should be, to understand that. So I think it's that notion, to move ahead and to help us understand the reasons why, both conceptually and pragmatically is just really, really important. I'm intrigued, and again, another area where I'm still trying to learn on is the kind of interface now between quantitative and qualitative around configural or configurational analysis, things like qualitative comparative analysis, which really is, from my perspective, kind of a blend where you take the often sometimes qualitative features, but then put those to look at, again, from a complexity science perspective, kind of what's the constellation of factors that can produce a successful outcome. And again, what I like about it is it's not just a reductionistic additive, type approach. And it's not there's only one method, to get there. It's this equifinality principle, you can get the same place through different ways.
You call it equifinality principle?
Yes, yeah.
I never heard of it. That's so what is that? What does that mean?
It just what I said. I probably oversimplified it, but the notion is that there are different pathways, or often, if you will, different mechanisms of change that may be. Let's just take a simple example to control your diabetes. Okay, it may not be that the only way that you need to get there is to intensify your therapy, and get there. For other people, so in different conditions, you can do this via different pathways.
But so different pathways to achieve the same end. Is that
Yes, yes.
very, very interesting? Let's go back to this equity issue that you raised earlier. Many might think that, and by many I mean mostly me, might think that that when you're talking about equity, you're talking about reach, and you're talking about reaching people who might identify themselves as poor versus rich, or black versus white, or multimorbid versus single morbid, or and there's got to be a statistic, a table 1 describing their prevalence in your population. And if you have enough diversity, you can check the box and move on.
Right.
Is that it?
Well, I certainly am not an expert. This is another area which I'm just, it's so rewarding to see the work exploding and things, and again, finally getting some real attention. To me, focusing on, if you will, the underlying factors, again, more at a population basis, the social determinants of health that I think drive a lot of these things is important. But in REAIM, this issue of equity, or we get at it through this representativeness dimension, I think it is clearly important at each of these levels. So starting at, let me just give a quick example. And I kind of wished you and I talked and I decided not to use any slides, but I almost wish this one, I had this slide that I have that I call the health equity slide, which shows all these re-aim dimensions. But if you just think the story that if we talk about what settings are going to be able to deliver, new interventions, like, will this work, like in tribal communities, okay, in federally qualified health centers, as well as academic centers. So that's what we call adoption. Then we get, as you well articulated, the reach at the individual level, who has access, who can participate, who can take the time off work, who doesn't have the transportation challenges. Then we go to effectiveness, the E, and that is fortunately something we're getting more and more attention to. But the notion is, subgroup effects or heterogeneity of effects. Very importantly, the implementation dimension of REAIM, the I, that's the one that we've kind of expanded the most over the years. But that notion about both with what subsets of individuals and what subsets of staff, okay, can successfully deliver, as you said, with fidelity, and not only deliver with fidelity to the key principles, but be sufficiently sensitive enough clinically that they can appropriately adapt, the intervention. And then, of course, the maintenance thing. And often that maintenance, a big factor is resources to be able to sustain. So these equity issues come up at each step. And the little story I have that I try to show this through a graph is, even if you start out with an intervention that in its basic effectiveness research looks to be completely equitable, whatever group that you want to talk about, the most socially determinants challenge, it's 100%. If you have a difference of continued across these dimensions at the other ones, you end up where you go through the mental math or the exercise where the less advantaged group only gets like 1/4 or less of the benefit, even though the publication value says equal effectiveness.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to do, it seems to me, on this issue, because what in general in evidence-based practice we tend to dismiss treatment heterogeneity and
Yeah,
subgroup effects because they're very rare,
right.
on biological variables, on biographical variables, on contextual variables. The subgroup effects are much more likely to be present. And I think that's something that in general evidence-based practice, for instance, has for the most part continues or has ignored and continues to ignore. And I think we would like to see more subgroup analysis, quantitative and qualitative subgroup analysis on the basis of biographical and contextual subgroups, which I think go beyond simple labels, to really understand how people get in the way.
I couldn't even, sorry to interrupt,
No,
but just,
no, no.
just a comment. I couldn't agree more. And again, I think one of a huge opportunity that we're starting to see some work on is at the more basic fundamental determinants, the social determinants of issues, and how do those play out there. And I think fortunately we're starting to see some really great examples of pragmatic ways to address those issues, of food scarcity, inability to afford medication, transportation, family violence, a lot on and on, those key issues, I think both through patient reported outcomes that are feasible to collect, in real world settings, either prior to or at the visit or whatever, and follow up on, and or combined with some geospatial measures, I think. So again, another area where I think there's great promise to bring together different methodological and conceptual approaches to deal with those complex issues.
Particularly relevant when you have to do research on what Tudor Hart called the deep end, right? Or where people are struggling with resources to live and
Yes.
or to take care of themselves, and on top of that, you're inviting them to participate in research,
Yes.
and they may not have the capacity to do so. And then we have this almost self-fulfilling prophecy of research that fails to help them because they can't participate, and we don't develop research that is contextually sensible to
Yeah,
enable their participation, right? So there's a meta re-aim there in there in terms of the re-aim of the research process itself, if I may.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Russell, we're coming to the end of our time, and I have two more questions to ask you. What's the meaning of your work?
The meaning of my work. I didn't reflect on that one. Um, I think I'm going to go back a bit of a broken record. I think it's to this transparency
Yeah.
notion there, and again that things are complex and contextual, but it's possible to address those. I think I'd say that's the meaning my work, if you can, through re-aim and some other approaches, trying to, if you will, shine the light or some real challenges that to help translate this more basic research, into something that is going to make a difference in the real world. This is a continuing journey. We don't have it worked out yet, and again, we're trying now with the new extension of what we're calling Re-aim 2.0 to try and focus specifically on some contextual factors, that may be especially related to some of the different re-aim dimensions. The problem with context is we all kind of intuitively understand that it's important, but some people have even defined context as being everything, or everything outside the intervention. So then it becomes totally, unwieldy. And how do you begin to study everything, in the world? So not that we have it worked out, but a work in progress is through this extension of Re-aim 2.0 to try and focus on some specific limited set of factors.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think the work so far, recognizing there's more and more to come, but the work so far, I think, has enabled us to see that context that has been shaping your career, but also shaping your view of science and the application of science to it. That context has, your work has made managing that, dealing with that, addressing that feasible, and through the lenses that you've been offering us generously and rigorously, like Re-aim, you've helped us understand the real challenges and opportunities of taking what we think might work and really deriving public health value as a result of that work. So no, it's been a great privilege to have you here, and but also to have you in our career, and to have your contribution embedded in the science that we've been trying to do at our care unit. So I have to thank you in that way, but also thank you for being with us. And I have my last question, Russ, and that is, what's next for Russell Glasgow?
Um, I think right now we have a new center on implementation science from the Cancer Institute, and we're looking at trying to integrate different disciplines around our theme is like a paragraph long, but it has to do with pragmatic implementation science approaches to value and values in rural primary care. So it's this notion, again, coming back to this mixing a hopefully sincere and somewhat in-depth understanding of patient values and preferences with a more traditional economic and cost approach to value, the more hardcore issues, but that integration. And it's been really rewarding to see several other centers around the country starting, to address this interface. And I think this issue of cost, and I don't mean that just narrowly in terms of only numerical fiduciary cost, but burden too on both staff and patients and how that impacts sustainment. So that's where we're going. And again, if it's like anything else, my approach to that will take another turn or two in terms of getting to that, but we're having fun.
Eventually, we'll get to the moon. Eventually, we'll get to the moon. Russell Glasgow, what a pleasure to chat with you today. You are generous and also a phenomenal teacher, because you've been able to tell us a lot about these concepts, and no slides. But thank you so much for being with us. And for everyone that has joined us, thanks for joining the CareCast from the Care Unit. And I hope that you can join us on our next episode. And until then, please take care. Thanks again, Russell.